My name is Eleanor Hart, and I am 63 years old. For most of my adult life, I have carried myself with a quiet sense of gratitude, believing that love, steady, earned love, could be enough to weather the disappointments that accumulate over 6 decades. I grew up in a modest house, married young, divorced in my 40s, rebuilt myself, and later remarried a man named Daniel. At the time, he felt like calm water after too many storms. We settled into a life that many people might have envied. A warm little home in the suburbs. Early breakfasts together. Evening walks. Mutual routines that felt like stitched threads keeping us steady. My retirement fund gave us stability, and Daniel's consulting work brought in a modest income. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, proudly comfortable. One thing Daniel always said, from the earliest days of our relationship, was that we would share everything. Every joy, every burden, every dollar, he'd chuckle. It became something of a motto between us. I believed him. At 63, I didn't think I had time left in my life for another betrayal. But looking back, I see the subtle signs. His mother, Margaret, a sharp-tongued 78-year-old woman who had never entirely accepted me, had been struggling financially for years. She had a talent for spending and no talent at all for budgeting. Before Daniel and I married, he warned me gently, "Mom's complicated. I want to help her, but she doesn't make it easy." In our early years together, I tried to have compassion. Whenever she needed groceries or a doctor's bill paid, we would help. But as time went on, her requests grew bolder. First $50. Then $500. Then 2004, emergency dental work that, I later learned, never happened. Still, Daniel assured me, "We'll talk about everything. We'll decide things together." It was a promise I held on to. Not because I needed control, but because I needed honesty. I had lived through a marriage built on financial betrayal before, and I wasn't eager to experience that again. 2 months ago, however, Margaret sold her condo, and instead of securing herself financially, she immediately spent most of it on what she called celebrations of life. In other words, spas, clothes, restaurants, and a trip to Vegas where she apparently rediscovered that she was still vibrant. When she called us one evening, she sounded panicked. "Daniel, darling, I'm in a bit of trouble. My bank is giving me grief, and I need just a little help before things get sorted." I remember overhearing him on the phone, pacing the hallway. "Mom, we don't have much liquid right now. We can't be giving out thousands." His tone, for once, sounded firm. That reassured me. Later that night, he told me it was handled. "She'll figure it out." But Margaret was not the sort of woman who simply figured things out. Instead, she found creative shortcuts. At the time, I didn't know that she had recently discovered that Daniel and I shared a joint savings account, one that held the nest egg I had built carefully over a decade. I didn't know she had been asking him questions about it during their private calls. And I certainly didn't know she had a knack for pushing past boundaries with the persistence of a crow tapping at a window. 2 weeks later, my life, my trust, my marriage, my sense of security, came crashing down because of one woman's entitlement and one man's cowardice. It began on a quiet Wednesday morning with a single bank notification. A notification that showed $45,000 missing. And the worst part wasn't the number. The worst part was realizing exactly who had taken it. And who had let her. But I didn't know that yet. I only knew the sinking feeling in my stomach, right before everything unraveled. I remember the moment with cinematic clarity. I was standing by the coffee pot, waiting for it to finish dripping, when my phone chimed with a bank alert. Normally those alerts were small things, $10 here, $100 there. But this one had a tone I didn't recognize. A higher priority. Large withdrawal, $45,000. I felt the world tilt. Not metaphorically, I genuinely had to grip the counter to steady myself. I opened the app with trembling hands. The joint savings account balance had plummeted, like the floor had dropped from our financial home. $45,000. Dollars. Gone. The withdrawal had been made the previous afternoon, routed to an external account. The name on the receiving account wasn't visible yet, but the transaction number hinted at something familiar, something I'd seen on a document recently, though I couldn't place it. Heart pounding, I called Daniel. He answered cheerfully, completely unaware of the bomb that had detonated. Morning, honey. Everything okay? I swallowed. There's money missing from our account. A pause. How much? 45,000. The silence that followed was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of fear. Guilt. Something heavy. I whispered, Daniel, what happened? He exhaled shakily. Mom needed help. I closed my eyes. My jaw locked. My breath stopped somewhere between my lungs and my throat. What? She was in trouble, Ellie. Real trouble. And she didn't have anyone else to turn to. She turned to our savings? He hesitated. It's our money. And we share everything. That line, those familiar, rehearsed words, landed like a slap. We share everything, he repeated, as though I needed reminding. But his tone wasn't one of unity, it was defensive, almost accusatory. I asked quietly, did you authorize this? He took too long to answer. I didn't stop it. Did you give her access? Another silence. And in that silence, everything became clear. Daniel, the man who promised transparency, who promised we'd make decisions together, had turned our marriage into a door his mother could walk through whenever she pleased. I asked him flatly, why didn't you talk to me? He responded with something I'll never forget, because you would have said no. I said nothing. I couldn't. I stood there, watching the steam rise from the coffee maker, imagining it was the last warmth I'd feel that morning. He continued, she'll pay it back once her accounts settle. It's temporary. I knew it wasn't temporary. Margaret didn't repay money. Ever. I whispered, she stole from me. She borrowed, he corrected, stern now. Daniel, I said softly, my name is on that account. That was my savings. My retirement. My safety. You act like she's some criminal, he snapped. She's my mother. And there it was. His loyalty, laid bare, pointing in a direction that did not include me. But betrayal has a funny way of clarifying things. As I stood there, I realized, this wasn't just a financial violation. It was a marital one. A moral one. A personal one. And it wasn't going to end here. Especially because Daniel had no idea that I had been keeping records. Or that I recognized the transaction number. Or that I wasn't going to let his mother walk away with $45,000 of my life's work. Not without a fight. To understand the full shape of the betrayal, I need to explain a bit more about Daniel and Margaret, and about me. Because the roots of a conflict like this run deep, often deeper than the moment where everything snaps. I met Daniel when I was 52, at a community book club I joined after my first husband passed away. Daniel was gentle, funny, the kind of man who opened doors not out of obligation, but because he genuinely believed small kindness mattered. I admired that, especially after years of being married to a man who had treated generosity like currency he could withhold whenever he wanted power. Daniel seemed like healing. But early on, I noticed something unsettling. Whenever Margaret called, which was often, Daniel transformed. He became nervous, eager, defensive. Like a child trying to earn approval from a parent who never gave it freely. I asked him once, why does she talk to you like you owe her something? He shrugged. She raised me alone. Worked 3 jobs. I wouldn't be where I am without her sacrifices. I understood loyalty. Truly. But I also understood unhealthy loyalty, the kind where a mother's love becomes a rope tied around her son's neck, tightening whenever he tries to stand independently. As for Margaret, she saw me as a threat from the beginning. Not because I was unkind. Not because I disliked her, but because I represented a shift in Daniel's priorities. Someone else he cared about. Someone else he listened to. There was one moment, 3 years into our marriage, that stands out in particular. We were at a family dinner, and Margaret mentioned she was behind on credit card payments. I suggested gently that she consider talking to a financial advisor, maybe even downsizing. It was practical, not judgmental. She stared at me, narrowed her eyes, and said, "Some of us don't have the luxury of being comfortable." I heard the unspoken words. Comfortable because of my savings. Comfortable because I had worked hard for years, carefully building a stable life while she had spent recklessly. Daniel had pressured me to give her money before, but each time I explained calmly that handouts wouldn't solve her deeper issues. I wasn't cruel, I was realistic. I was also adamant that our finances needed boundaries. He'd always end the conversation with a sigh and a promise, "You're right. I won't let her use us." I believed he meant it. But 2 months ago, just before all of this unraveled, Daniel had a quiet panic about the consulting firm he worked for restructuring. His hours were reduced. His income became uncertain. And in that uncertainty, his mother's influence grew louder. Now, in retrospect, I see clearly that Margaret had been pushing him for access. Asking questions about our accounts. Planting seeds. If Eleanor really loved you, she'd want to help your family. She used guilt the way some people use tools. Efficiently. Sharply. With intention. And I know Daniel, for all his kindness, was terrified of disappointing her. Terrified of being the son who didn't come through. But I also knew something they didn't expect. I had learned from my first marriage how to document everything, every deposit, every transfer, every conversation about money. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I promised myself I would never again be caught unprepared. I kept a separate private fund too, tucked away like a quiet guardian. And more importantly, 2 years ago, when Daniel's laptop had crashed, he'd asked me to help back up his files. In the process, I had seen the last 4 digits of Margaret's account number in an email thread. The same 4 digits I had just seen on the withdrawal record. I felt something sharpen inside me. Something steady, not angry, focused. Because if there's one thing age gives you, it's the calm certainty that truth always emerges. And I was going to make sure it did. But first, I had to gather proof. The morning after the discovery, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The kind of resolve that comes not from fury, but from a deep sense of self-preservation. I walked into the kitchen where Daniel sat at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up at me with guilt written across his face, but he said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply said, "I'm going to the bank." His shoulders stiffened. "You don't need to do that." "I do," I replied calmly. "Because I need information. And information isn't optional." He opened his mouth, but I had already grabbed my keys. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even raise my voice. Quiet resolve is far more powerful. At the bank, I met with a branch manager named Tessa, a woman around my age with silver hair and sharp eyes. I explained what happened and asked for a printout of the transaction details. As she pulled up the records, she frowned. "Mrs. Hart, who authorized this withdrawal?" "That's what I'm trying to determine," I said. She studied the digital signature. "It wasn't you. And it wasn't your husband. Then who?" She turned the screen toward me. A single name appeared beside the authorization tag. Margaret Dawson. Not my name. Not Daniel's. And most importantly, not a joint holder. Tessa looked troubled. This shouldn't have been possible. Not without a secondary access form on file. Could someone have completed one without my knowledge? She pulled up the form. This one was filed in person, about 6 weeks ago. I leaned in. The signature was unmistakably Margaret's shaky handwriting. But there was another signature beneath it. Daniel's. My stomach tightened. Not forged. Voluntary. Tessa continued, your husband added her as an emergency access user. It gives her the ability to make withdrawals under certain conditions. And what conditions would those be? Any condition where he approves it orally. He didn't need to sign. A verbal confirmation was legally binding. I thanked her quietly, even though my heart was pounding. Then I asked for printed copies of every document, application forms, access authorizations, transfer records. She handed them to me in a neat stack. As I placed the papers into my bag, I asked, one more thing. Can I request a temporary freeze on the account? Given the circumstances, absolutely. On my way out of the bank, I sat in my car for a long moment. I had known Daniel had done something wrong. But now I had proof, solid, irrefutable proof. Still, information wasn't enough. I wanted to know why. I wanted to know what conversations had unfolded behind my back. And I wanted to hear it from someone who had nothing to lose. So I drove to Margaret's apartment. She opened the door wearing a silk robe and wide, smug smile, like the cat who ate the canary. Eleanor, she said sweetly, to what do I owe the honor? I stepped inside slowly. I'm here because $45,000 is missing. She raised her eyebrows innocently. Oh? Daniel didn't tell you? He told me enough. She smirked. Well, good. Then you know it's only fair. Fair? Yes, she said, settling into her armchair. Daniel has obligations. Family obligations. You might not understand that. I stared at her. You took money that wasn't yours. She waved a hand dismissively. Oh, don't be dramatic. You have more than enough. Something clicked in her tone. A presumption that I owed her something simply because she existed. I said nothing. Instead, I let her talk. Because people like Margaret always reveal themselves. She leaned back. Besides, Daniel said you keep too much control over the money anyway. I told him that wasn't healthy. And he agreed. The room tilted slightly. Not from shock this time, but from clarity. She continued, he knows where his loyalties lie. You should remember that. I looked at her slowly, letting her arrogance hang in the air. And then I smiled. Just a little. Because she had just given me exactly what I needed. Her confession. Her intentions. Her entitlement. All spoken out loud. And recorded. Right there in my coat pocket. This was only the beginning. I left Margaret's apartment with the kind of calm that only comes when every missing piece of the puzzle finally snaps into place. The crisp winter air hit my face as I walked back to my car, but it felt invigorating, not chilling. I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I pulled into the small park near our neighborhood, parked under a large oak tree, and took out my phone. I replayed the recording, her smug admissions, her casual cruelty, her acknowledgement that Daniel had agreed I controlled the money, that he needed to prioritize family, and that she felt entitled to my savings. It was all there. In her voice. Clear as day. Next, I pulled out the stack of documents from the bank. Each page was a piece of evidence, pieces Margaret and Daniel had underestimated. I sorted through them slowly. Daniel's signature authorizing her emergency access. The withdrawal record tied to her account. The attempted concealment of the transfer. The account freeze confirmation. I've always believed that truth has weight. And now I held all of it in my hands. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the heartbreak. The betrayal. The humiliation. The sense of being used. But then another feeling rose, steadier, stronger. A sense of justice. This wasn't going to be about revenge through rage. This was going to be revenge through truth. A calm, methodical unveiling of the choices they had made. I spent the next 2 days quietly gathering everything. The folder of financial logs I kept for years. Screenshots of Daniel's messages with Margaret. He wasn't as good at deleting conversations as he thought. Voice memos from past discussions about boundaries. Old notes about Margaret's recurring debts. Tax records proving I contributed 90% to the savings account. I built a file. Then a binder. Then a digital backup. When I finished, I realized something powerful. Not only did I have absolute proof of their actions, I had proof that protected me legally, financially, and personally. Now I needed one more ingredient, the truth directly from Daniel. I waited until Sunday afternoon, when he was relaxed, unsuspecting, watching a documentary in the living room. I approached him with a softness that made his head lift in surprise. "Daniel, we need to talk." He paused the TV. His face already carried worry. "Ellie, please, don't be angry anymore. Mom just..." I raised a hand gently. "I'm not here to argue. I want to understand. The truth is, people reveal far more when they think you're calm." So I sat beside him. Not close, not far. Just present. "Tell me," I said, "what exactly did your mother say to you before the transfer?" He rubbed his eyes. "She said she'd be evicted. That she didn't have anyone else. That she was embarrassed to ask you. And you believed that?" He nodded. "And you didn't think to discuss it with me?" He sighed. "You would have said no." I nodded slowly. "And instead of talking to me, you gave her access to our savings." He hesitated, but ultimately, yes. "And she told you I was controlling?" He swallowed. "She said you treat money like your child. That you hold it over me." I let that sink in. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed everything. Fear. Manipulation. Immature loyalty. All tangled into a decision that cost us $45,000. I looked at him gently. "Daniel, did you want her to have the money? Or were you afraid not to give it to her?" His voice cracked. "I didn't want to disappoint her. She made me feel like I owed her." That was the truth. Finally. I whispered, "Thank you." He blinked. Confused. "For what?" "For telling me honestly." Because I had it now, his confession. His motives. His choices. And with that, I could finally move to the next step. The confrontation. And I wasn't going into it empty-handed. I chose a Wednesday evening for the confrontation, after dinner, when the air is quiet and a person's guard tends to be lower. The house smelled faintly of roasted chicken, and Daniel sat at the table, pretending to scroll through his emails though his hands shook slightly. He knew something was coming. I placed the binder, the thick, meticulously organized binder, on the table in front of him. He looked at it, then at me. "What is that?" "Everything," I said calmly. "Everything you didn't tell me." He swallowed. "Ellie, please. We're going to go through this together." Slowly. Truthfully. He shifted uncomfortably. "Is this really necessary?" "Yes," I replied. "Because transparency is something you promised me. And I intend to hold you to it." I opened the binder. Page by page. First, the bank authorization form. His signature beside Margaret's. Daniel paled. "I didn't think you'd ever see that." "I know," I replied softly. "You didn't want me to." Next, the withdrawal record. The trace to Margaret's account. Then, printed screenshots of text messages where Margaret encouraged him to hide financial decisions from me. He blinked rapidly. "You went through my phone? You left it unlocked on the counter." And I was looking for the truth. He covered his face with both hands. Oh my God. The room felt like a courtroom, quiet, still, no raised voices, just the weight of facts settling into place. I continued, pulling out the recording transcript. "I visited your mother." He looked up sharply. "What?" "She told me everything. Quite proudly, actually. His face drained of color. Ellie, what did she say? I read the lines aloud, the ones where she claimed he needed to prioritize real family, where she accused me of being controlling, where she justified taking the money because I had enough. He looked as if the world had cracked open beneath him. I didn't know she said those things, he whispered. She did, I said. And you enabled her. He stared at the table. I messed up. I messed up so badly. I paused, letting the moment breathe. Daniel, I'm not here to destroy you. I loved you. I trusted you. But trust is built on choices. And your choices hurt me. He nodded slowly. I know. And they weren't accidents, I added. They were decisions. Intentional ones. The truth settled between us. Heavy but undeniable. Then I reached the final section of the binder, my financial logs. My contribution records. The documentation proving the majority of the savings came from me. This is important, I said gently. Because it means this wasn't just a marital betrayal. It was financial violation. He buried his face again. I'm so sorry, Ellie. I don't know how to fix this. You can start, I said, by listening. He lifted his eyes. We are going to set boundaries, I said calmly. Firm ones. Legal ones. And your mother is no longer to have access to our accounts. He nodded frantically. Of course. Absolutely. I'll remove her immediately. And, I added, you are going to speak with her. Not as a frightened child. As an adult. You are going to tell her she will repay the money, every dollar, under a structured plan. He inhaled sharply. She's going to be furious. That isn't my concern, I replied. She isn't my responsibility. He hesitated. Ellie, can you be with me when I tell her? I shook my head. No. You need to separate from her emotionally, and my presence won't allow that. You need to learn to stand on your own. His shoulders slumped, but he nodded. And Daniel? Yes? This is your chance to prove something, not to her, but to me. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and hope. What do I need to do? I closed the binder gently. You need to choose who you are. And who you're loyal to. His eyes glistened. I choose you. I didn't respond immediately. Because words are easy. Actions are not. And his actions in the next 24 hours would determine the rest of our marriage. The next day, Daniel drove to his mother's apartment alone. He left the house in a quiet, heavy silence, as if walking toward a storm. I watched him pull out of the driveway, unsure whether he would return with clarity or collapse back into old patterns. I didn't accompany him. I spent the day cleaning the house, a kind of ritual cleansing, folding laundry, sweeping floors, opening windows to let in fresh winter air. The stillness helped. 3 hours later, Daniel returned. His face was drawn, eyes red, like he had been through emotional battle. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table. It's done, he said. I waited. I told her everything. That she manipulated me. That she crossed a line. That she had to repay the money. And that she would never interfere in our finances again. How did she react? I asked softly. She screamed, he admitted. Said you poisoned me. Said I was abandoning her. She even tried to guilt-trip me by talking about everything she sacrificed for me as a child. And what did you say to that? I said, he exhaled, that sacrifice doesn't entitle her to steal from my wife. I nodded slowly. That was a step. He continued, she refused to pay at first. Said she didn't have it. But when I threatened to take legal action, yes, legal action, she finally agreed to a repayment plan. That surprised me. Legal action? He nodded. I told her I'd sign a statement confirming everything and hand it to you. So you could file a police report if she didn't cooperate. That was more than I expected. Did she sign anything? He placed a single folded document on the table. She signed a repayment agreement. Monthly installments. Written and witnessed. I unfolded it. The signature was shaky, resentful, but it was real. Daniel spoke again, voice low. She told me she would never forgive me for choosing you. I met his eyes. And how do you feel about that? He swallowed hard. Relieved. Terrified. But relieved. He reached across the table. I want to earn your trust back, Ellie. Truly. I didn't take his hand, yet. But I didn't pull away from his sincerity either. Trust, I said gently, is rebuilt through consistency. Not promises. He nodded. Then I'll be consistent. And for once, I believed he meant it. Not because he was desperate, but because he looked awakened. Like a man who had finally stepped out of someone else's shadow. The next week unfolded differently. He transferred his paychecks into a separate account in his name so our joint assets were protected. He set up automatic payments from Margaret to my account under the repayment plan. He blocked her from all financial access permanently. He began therapy to understand his patterns of enabling and misplaced obligation. It wasn't perfection. But it was progress. We ate dinner at the table every night, talking honestly for the first time in years. Not about money, about boundaries, fears, identity. About how loyalty can be twisted. About how adulthood sometimes requires hard separations. One evening, he looked at me with remorse in his eyes. I didn't realize how much I hurt you. I spoke softly. You hurt yourself too. He nodded. And I'm done letting other people dictate my life. It was the beginning of something, not new, but rebuilt. As for Margaret, she kept her distance. The repayment checks arrived each month, with shaking handwriting but consistent amounts. She never called. Never apologized. Good. Consequences are often the best teachers. But the real closure wasn't in the repayment. It was in what came next. It's been 8 months since the day I discovered the missing $45,000. 8 months of rebuilding, redefining, and recentering my life. And as I reflect now, at 63, I realize something profound: betrayal does not always end a marriage. Sometimes, it reshapes one. Daniel and I didn't separate. But we also didn't return to who we were before. Instead, we became something healthier, 2 adults with boundaries, not a husband pulled between a wife and a mother who clung to him like a chain. The repayment plan is nearly halfway completed. Every month, a check arrives. Not because Margaret wants to repay, she doesn't, but because the consequences require her to. And sometimes that's enough. Daniel has kept his word. He attends therapy weekly. He initiated a conversation that restructured our finances legally, ensuring no one, including him, can touch my savings without mutual signed consent. And he has maintained a firm, respectful distance from Margaret. He once told me, I finally understand that caring for someone doesn't mean obeying them. Growth can come at any age, even in your 60s. As for me, I learned something too, something I wish I could tell my younger self: protecting yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. Especially when you've worked a lifetime to build stability. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fueled by fire. It was fueled by documentation. Calm truth. Quiet strength. Boundary setting. Legal clarity. And self-respect. Ethical revenge is simply this: revealing the truth and letting people face the consequences of their own choices. Daniel faced his mother. Margaret faced accountability. And I faced myself, and found a woman stronger than I realized. Now, when I think about the phrase, "we share everything," I smile. Because now we share responsibility. Honesty. Growth. But not access to my life's savings. some lessons only need to be learned once. And if you, listening to this story, have ever felt betrayed, by a partner, by family, by someone who took advantage of your kindness, remember this: you are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to hold people accountable. And you are allowed to rebuild on your terms. Thank you for listening to my story. If you'd like more stories like this, real, reflective, and rooted in justice, share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps bring these narratives to life.